Tonight on Primetime Politics, upping the ante.
I had a good call with Donald Trump last night again.
The Prime Minister reaches out to the incoming U.S. President, reacting to Donald Trump and his threat to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian goods. Coming up, we will speak to Anita, the President of the Treasury Board, to find out what the Trudeau government will do to prevent the tariffs from happening and address the drugs and migrants that Trump says are coming from Canada. Also,
we see that it's a problem. Now the Americans are seeing it's a problem too.
We'll hear from the Alberta Premier. We'll get Danielle Smith's reaction to Donald Trump's threat and hear what her government is doing with or without Ottawa. Plus, U.S. Senator Tim Kaine on Canada's defense spending and what politicians are saying in the American capital. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Donald Trump is not yet sworn in, but already he's touching off a political storm here in Ottawa. Yesterday evening, turning to Truth Social to say the following: on January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time that they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price. Now, that post, again from Donald Trump, led to a phone call between the Prime Minister and the incoming President, led to a phone call between the Prime Minister and the Ontario Premier, and tomorrow there will be another phone call involving all the First Ministers. Still not enough for the opposition.
Despite the fact the Prime Minister has known for years that Trump was threatening these tariffs, and for 3 weeks that President Trump had won the election, the only plan he has is a Zoom call. No plan to reverse his disastrous liberalization of drugs that have killed people and now threaten our borders. No plan to fix the broken borders that he caused. No plan to cancel the tax increases that will drive billions and many jobs away. Where's the plan to put Canada first? Here.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Instead of panicking and falling back on slogans like the Leader of the Opposition, we rolled up our sleeves and we're getting to work. We're working with all the premiers, pulling together in a Team Canada approach, because that's how we defend Canadian jobs from coast to coast to coast. I spoke with Donald Trump yesterday evening, talked about how important it was for us to work together to solve some of the challenges we're facing as a continent, as countries, but also work to grow our economy, protect our workers on both sides of the border. This is the responsible, methodical approach we're taking as we move forward, while our opponent falls back on slogans and fear.
Well, more than 73% of Canada's exports go to the United States, so a tariff, especially one as large as 25%, would have a major impact on the national economy. To talk about this, we're now joined by the Treasury Board President, also the Minister of Transport, Anita Anand. Minister, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
Listen, you know, the opposition, you heard it in the House, they're demanding from your government a plan to deal with these criticisms. Does your government have a plan to answer the call from Mr. Trump?
By all means, and let us remember that we did work with President Trump during his last administration. We have the tools, we have the personnel, we have the expertise and the capacity to continue to put that best foot forward. For example, we are fortifying our borders with new surveillance equipment, and we have the public servants necessary at the CBSA to do that work. We also have a Canada-U.S. committee that we are utilizing. We were actually meeting last night as well. That's our third meeting. So the work has already begun, and it had begun before last night. We are without question ready for any eventuality, including working with the Trump administration and protecting Canadian jobs and the Canadian economy.
Okay, so you've been working on these issues then of illegal drugs, illegal migrants across our shared border. But how big of a problem is it? Because reading through what Donald Trump put on Truth Social last night, it seems to be this implication that it's a large problem for the United States, which Canada has not been addressing enough.
We have a strong immigration system. We have strong and fortified borders. And if you come to Canada illegally, you will be deported. That is a key message that we as a government have, and I know that Minister LeBlanc and Minister Miller are very serious about ensuring that the rules relating to immigration, the rules relating to public security are followed and enforced.
And in terms of the drug supply, because Mr. Trump specifically points to fentanyl as an issue for the United States, putting the onus on Canada to do something about the cross-border of that drug. Are there enough measures in place to deal with his concern?
We have strong rules in place in the Criminal Code of Canada, which remains in effect for our country's protection, and we will spare no expense at enforcing the law. That is a beacon of the Canadian legal system and Canada as a whole, and we will continue to ensure that illegal conduct is prosecuted and that those who break the law are facing the consequences necessary.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think this will hedge off any tariff being imposed? Because, you know, when you go through the post again, he says on day one, when he's inaugurated, he's going to bring in these tariffs. There is no grace period for Canada or Mexico. He says the tariffs will stand until he's satisfied with the actions Canada takes. Can you actually prevent the tariffs from happening? Is there enough, do you think, to sway Donald Trump?
Michael, let me mention that we worked with the Trump administration. The last time we actually succeeded in having a new NAFTA for our country. We actually succeeded in ensuring that $3.3 billion of trade that passes through our border every single day with the United States continues. And we also ensured that during the pandemic, we continue to supply raw materials to the United States while importing products that they were making with our raw materials. So the relationship between Canada and the United States is symbiotic. We rely on them, but they also rely on us. And we will continue to stress that point as we protect Canadian businesses, as we protect Canadian workers, and as we build the Canadian economy of the 21st century.
But does that plan include retaliation? If these tariffs do come through on the Donald Trump side, will Canada put in its own tariffs on things coming from the United States?
We will spare no expense at ensuring that we have the protections in place for Canadian workers and Canadian businesses. That's what I will say at this point, Michael. We have not shied away from using retaliatory measures in the past if necessary, and again, all options are on the table. But as I said, our goal is to continue working with the Trump administration to ensure that that symbiotic relationship remains strong for the workers and the businesses on both sides of the border.
Minister Anita, Anand, thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you very much.
Now, as we heard, the Prime Minister was quick to reach out to the Ontario Premier last night, Doug Ford. As the current chair of the Council of the Federation, Doug Ford and his office are the ones helping facilitate tomorrow's conference call between Canada's First Ministers. We are expecting that call to take place later in the day tomorrow, but the Ontario Premier is not waiting to express his opinion on the matter. Take a listen to what we heard earlier today.
To compare us to Mexico is the most insulting thing I've ever heard from our friends and closest allies, the United States of America. It's the biggest threat we've ever seen in as far as we're concerned, in decades, more than decades. I could never remember a threat from a U.S. administration like we received today.
Well, with her thoughts on all of this, we're now happy to be welcomed back to the program, the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier, thank you for making the time.
My pleasure. Nice to see you, Michael.
And you. Listen, you know, I was reading some of the earlier comment that you gave on the tweet, or I guess the post that was put out by the incoming president on Truth Social, because you describe his concerns about drugs and illegal migrants as being legitimate. So I'm wondering if you could build on that, because I think for many Canadians, when they hear concerns about illegal drugs, illegal migrants, they think for the United States it's mainly an issue coming from Mexico. But from what you know of what's happening along our shared border, just what is coming from Canada into the United States?
Well, look, we've got a very serious opioid and fentanyl crisis in our province. We're seeing record numbers of deaths and have for a number of years. And we know that there are components coming in from British Columbia and the United States and then going back out the other way again. We've got to address that issue, not only for our own people, but now, of course, because the Americans have identified that too. We also see that with the open borders policy that the federal government has had for the last couple of years, I mean, 1.8 million people came into Canada in 2023, and the Americans have seen a doubling of the number of contacts at the Canadian border. So they're beginning to see that illegal migrants are using Canada as a staging area to get into the United States. We have to take the Americans' concerns at face value, address them if we're going to be able to get on to talk about our mutual interests on trade.
Mm-hmm. But is this 25% tariff threat justified, or do you see it as basically a negotiating tactic?
Well, look, I mean, I take the U.S. president, the incoming president, seriously. He's very clear about the things that are irritating to him when it comes to his relationship with Canada. He's irritated by China using increasingly Mexico, but in the past it's been Canada as a staging area to get cheap products into the United States and hollow out their manufacturing sector. He's been very frustrated by immigration. He's been frustrated by fentanyl. He has been frustrated by the fact that Canada isn't pulling its weight in meeting its 2% NATO defense spending target. So I would say that those things, that if that's what he is leading with, saying that the condition of having fruitful trade negotiations means solving these things, it's up to us to pressure the federal government to solve these things.
Mm-hmm. What would that kind of tariff do to the Alberta economy, though?
Oh, devastating. I mean, I think every one of us realizes how devastating it would be, because it's not just the tariffs. You also have a federal government that is piling on a variety of different policies that make life more expensive. The carbon tax is anticipated to go up to 61 cents per liter when it comes to gasoline and diesel. That'll make everything so much more expensive than the United States. The capital gains tax changes. So if you've got businesses making decisions about where they're going to invest to be able to get access to a favorable market, we're going to see all of those dollars heading south. And so I'm very concerned about the 25% tariff, not just on oil and gas, but on our agri-food products, on our forestry products, on our increasingly robust manufacturing sector. We have to take this seriously. We have to address these things that are causing the trade tension.
Mm-hmm. Now, we did hear from Pierre Poilievre today. He had a news conference here in Ottawa, and I want to play a part of what he had to say for you and for people at home. Take a listen to this.
The Prime Minister has to put aside partisanship and, in the spirit of Team Canada, cancel his energy cap, which would see Alberta and Saskatchewan produce 35% less energy at a time when we need those jobs. It is our biggest industry and our biggest export.
Now, for Canadians who are perhaps more concerned about greenhouse gases, that statement might be a bit jarring, but I'm wondering what your reaction is to what we heard from Mr. Poilievre, also how you think removing the emissions cap would perhaps help Canada forge a working relationship with the incoming Trump administration.
Well, look, Pierre Poilievre is absolutely right. We know that the emissions cap being proposed is so aggressive on such a short time frame. The only way to reach it is by shutting in production. We think at least 1 million barrels per day by 2030 and 2 million barrels per day by 2035. You can't go to the Americans and say, hey, we're your solution to energy security. At the same time, back home, you're crushing the very industry that is going to provide that security. So I would say that one of the first things that Trudeau should do, if he wants to demonstrate good faith, if he wants to demonstrate it is a Team Canada approach, and he understands how important energy security is to the Americans and energy affordability is to the Americans, that he would take that off the table. Well, one other thing that the incoming president has said is that he wants gasoline and diesel prices to go down. He certainly won't be able to do that if he adds a 25% tariff to oil and even to natural gas. We want to make sure that is communicated well, so that we can use that as a point of negotiation. But I don't think that we get to that discussion until we address the things that are causing the irritation to the Americans in the first place. I think we've got to take the Trump administration at face value when they say They want a more secure border. They want to stop the fentanyl. They want to stop the illegal migration. They want us to meet our 2% NATO commitment. Those are the things we've got to deal with first.
Now, it just so happens, and I realize this was planned before Mr. Trump took to Truth Social last night, but it just so happens you introduced a motion today to push back on those emission caps from Ottawa, and it's going to happen before that national phone call tomorrow. Do you think that kind of legislative approach is going to have an impact on the kind of Team Canada spirit that the Prime Minister is asking for?
Well, look, I mean, we have to defend the interests of Albertans, and $120 billion worth of our oil and gas product goes across the border into the United States. It's the lion's share of our cross-border relationship with the Americans. We've got some 4 million barrels per day of production that is going down to the U.S. It's a heavy oil, and so it can be used to produce a number of products. It's the main thing that their refineries need in the Gulf Coast. It allows for them to rely on us rather than rely on Venezuela or Iran for their product. They need it for their strategic petroleum reserve. We think that it's a responsible thing to do, to send the message to Trudeau that there's no point in going forward with an emissions cap that is going to result in production losses, not only now because of our relationship with the United States, but it's unconstitutional. And we're prepared to assert that. We're certainly not going to put Alberta's interests aside in having negotiations as part of the team. What I would ask is for Trudeau to put his terrible policy aside in taking a Team Canada approach. And that's what I'll be talking to him about when we all meet as a group tomorrow.
You know, we were all in Halifax for the Council of the Federation when the premiers were one by one saying there was not enough consultation with Ottawa. You're now going to have this consultation. Do you think, given the challenges of the first Trump administration, this is the type of thing that needs to be formalized at an annual, biannual meeting of the First Ministers?
Well, look, we've been asking to have a formal First Ministers Conference for some time because we've seen, as we've been watching what is happening in the United States, we've seen how much the federal government has neglected its area of strategic defense and strategic infrastructure. If you look at the communiques coming out of the premiers, and remember, we come from all party stripes. If you look at the most recent communiques coming out, it was very much focused on what our relationship might look like with the United States if there was a change of government. We've been alive to this for some time. And it's disappointing that the Prime Minister hasn't asked to meet with us sooner. I'm glad that Doug Ford is now at the helm of the Council of the Federation, and he's managed to secure a meeting that we've been trying for some time. And I hope that it's a productive one. But it is going to require a little bit of soul searching on the part of Justin Trudeau to understand what he has done to create the circumstances that we find ourselves in, make amends, reverse course on some policies, and get this relationship back on track.
Premier Danielle Smith and I have a busy schedule today. Thank you very much for the time.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. Israel and Hezbollah have both agreed to a ceasefire. Backed by the United States and France, the agreement will take effect tomorrow morning local time. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel agreed to the ceasefire after killing many top Hezbollah leaders and weakening the Lebanon-based terror group. He also says it will allow Israel to refocus on Hamas, the remaining hostages, and Iran. Over 3,000 people have been killed in Lebanon since fighting began in October of 2023. Canadian Labour Congress President Bee Brusk was in Ottawa today calling on the government to implement a number of affordability measures. Brusk and Labour Congress officials asking Ottawa to implement universal pharmacare and make EI more accessible for Canadian workers, among several other measures. Brusk also continued her criticism of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, accusing the opposition leader of having an anti-worker record.
He's consistently attacked worker rights, championed anti-worker and anti-union bills, and undermined the very foundation of union advocacy. He's made it harder for workers to organize under Bill C-525 and gave employers the power to silence workers.
And finally, today is Election Day in Nova Scotia. Voters in the province will have until 8 p.m. Atlantic time tonight to cast a ballot. The latest numbers from Abacus data suggesting the incumbent PC party has a substantial lead over both the NDP and the Liberals. We are following the story. Well, as we said off top, the day in Ottawa has been dominated by talk of trade and a threat from Donald Trump to impose a punishing tariff if Canada does not address illegal drugs and migrants making their way across our southern border. But another issue that's been brewing has to do with Canada's defense spending. Some U.S. politicians say Canada should face consequences for not investing more, something I discussed with U.S. Senator Tim Kaine this past weekend at the Halifax International Security Forum. Senator, thank you for the time.
Absolutely. Great to be with you.
I want to begin with the criticism that Canada is hearing from certain American politicians who are criticizing Canada's defense investment, talking about potential consequences. How seriously should Canadians be listening to that message?
I think, criticism, some criticize, some urge and encourage, and maybe I'm a little more on the diplomatic side. A number of years ago, only 3 of the NATO nations were meeting their 2% of their GDP into defense spending. President Trump, when he was president, really pushed that. And then, frankly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has also been a moment of clarity. And so now we're well into the mid-20s in nations that are meeting their 2%. Canada is not yet there, but we heard loud and clear from the defense minister that we're going to get there. And the commitment that was made by the Prime Minister and others is Canada would be there by 2032, but even sooner if some things happen. And we had very candid discussions with the Defense Minister about, for example, if our acquisition processes, either in Canada or in the United States, are very slow, it's hard to get to the 2% level soon if everything that you're ordering is going to be delivered 4 or 5 years from now. And so we talked about acquisition challenges, but we also talked about the reasons for Canada to get to that minimum of 2%, which is certainly the global battle between democracies and autocracies, and Canada is such a wonderful member of the democracy team, but also new challenges that Canada and North America face in the Arctic, for example. And I think those everyday challenges are no longer theoretical, they really are everyday challenges. And so, I think we all need to step up and do more, and we heard very positive messages from the Canadian officials that we dialogued with this weekend about that.
You mentioned the Arctic, and of course the updated defense policy here in Canada has a very much Arctic northern focus. Is that where the United States believes Canada needs to show its expertise?
Canada has an expertise more than we do. I mean, I think there are things we can do together. But that's when you look at something like a NATO alliance, everybody has their value add. Everybody has something strategic that they bring to the table. NATO's growth to include Sweden and Finland. Sweden, very capable military. Finland, very capable military. Real understanding for Russian behavior. When we grow NATO, everybody's bringing their value add to the table, and we definitely view one of Canada's main value adds is this expertise in the Arctic, which is going to be to the good not only of Canada, but of all NATO allies and all democracies.
It was interesting to hear the former president of Taiwan address the forum yesterday, because I think it might surprise people to hear her commitment and her belief that despite the security challenges that Taiwan faces over the horizon, the battle against Ukraine must not be abandoned, because it will have an impact on what happens in the South China Sea, and in particular the Strait of Taiwan. The Biden administration has been very concerted about shoring up democratic allies in the South Pacific, in the South China Sea. There is now a new administration. Questions as to whether or not the United States, along with countries like Canada, will traverse the Taiwan Strait to keep the argument of international waters. What's your feeling on that? Is Taiwan at risk with the new administration?
I wouldn't say at risk, but I will say it's a little bit early to tell. The Biden administration in forging the AUKUS partnership, and I played a key role in that as a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee. AUKUS, the Quad, the renewed rapprochement really between the Republic of Korea and Japan, all of these things are parts of a network of alliances in the Indo-Pacific to try to provide support for allies, including Taiwan, and provide a deterrence to Chinese aggression. What will the Trump administration's approach to this be? One signal that's positive is the nomination of Marco Rubio to be Secretary of State, because Senator Rubio has been very forward-leaning on concerns about China, but also support for Taiwan, support for alliances like AUKUS, and so that he will be the Trump administration's chief diplomat, and I'm confident he'll be confirmed easily in the Senate. That is an early positive sign.
An early positive sign, but of course, based on the first Trump administration, there can be a high turnover in the Trump cabinet. What type of insecurity does that create? Well,
there can be high turnover, and also some of the other officials being named in the national security space, I'll admit, are a little more head scratchers. We're going to have a tough confirmation hearing on the Secretary of Defense. That's a little bit unusual. The Secretary of Defense is usually a day one confirmation. I think that's not going to be the case in this instance. And then some of the others, you know, whether it's Tulsi Gabbard or some of the Sebastian Gorka, who are being named, not all of whom are Senate confirmable, but as you're trying to read, okay, what are the tea leaves telling you about the direction? There's some mixed evidence, but again, I'm going to not assume the negative. I'm going to look at the positive. And Senator Rubio, I mean, to my way of thinking, not only on issues like China or pro-democracy for Ukraine, pro-NATO. Senator Rubio and I have the bill that we passed a year ago that says no American president can withdraw from NATO, absent a 2/3 vote of the Senate or an act of Congress, really expressing the Article 1 support for NATO. That's a Marco Rubio priority. Marco Rubio will be the first Secretary of State that I have served with who has a real passion around the Americas. You know, I was a missionary in Honduras. I don't think the U.S. pays enough attention in the Americas, and that's Yukon to Patagonia. We go east and west, and we don't pay enough attention in the Americas. Marco Rubio will be a guy who we don't have to wonder where his passions lie. The Americas is his passion. So those are all good early signs, but, you know, the devil's in the details, so we have much more to see.
Well, we are watching from this side of the border. I know you have to catch your flight. Senator, thank you for the time.
Yeah, I'm really glad we could do this. Thanks.
U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. Now, we'll have more from the Halifax International Security Forum as this week goes on, but for now, that is our program for this Tuesday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow night. Until then, take care.